If you've seen my recent video on deck building, then you probably know I was messing around with Fossil Magneton in that deck, and that's because I filmed that video while I was playtesting around with the Scientist Trainer Class theme deck. Is it Magneton or Magneton?
Magneton.
Okay, so the Scientist uses sciencey Pokemon. Basically inorganic monsters like Magneton, Electrode, Muck, just magnets, balls of energy, and pollution. That's exactly what you can expect in this deck. Now, that's what the intent was when I built this deck. What I did was accidentally just build an anti-Rain Dance deck that has absolutely no playability outside of Rain Dance matchups, but we'll get into that. So we got Magnemite, which is pretty tough to use because it's only got 40 HP, so if it's up against a Machop or Hitmonchan, it's going to get O-Code off of 1 energy turn 1. Thankfully, it does have Thunder Wave, which is pretty useful. For only 1 energy, you can deal some chip damage and also hopefully get some paralyzation off of it. And you do want to make sure that you're evolving into Magneton as soon as possible. On turn 2, try to get that Magneton into your hand because you're going to double your HP, and Magneton can attack for 2 energy. But Sonic Boom also has its problems, as it does get around weakness and resistance, but how many cards are actually resisting electric type in this format? It's basically none. You're not going to run into cards that resist electric typing. Instead, what you're going to do is miss out on hitting those water types for super effective damage, and that is a huge letdown. Sonic Boom would be more useful if it could get around Defender as well, but it doesn't. So your Magneton are basically just going to be big explodey boys that you load down with energy while you're either Sonic Booming turn after turn or relying on Electrode from Jungle to attack for its lower energy attacks. Electrode's Chain Lightning can be pretty fun to use. You just got to make sure you're not laying down a Grimer before you start using Chain Lightning turn after turn. But that does bring us to the next problem I ran into while I was playtesting this deck, and that's that Muck is normally very devastating to a lot of decks in base Fossil, but whenever you are running theme decks, you don't really have a lot of Pokemon with Pokemon powers, so really the only power that Muck was shutting down was of Dodrio from that Birdkeeper deck. And in the Birdkeeper deck, if you've watched the video, you know all of those Pokemon already have free retreat anyway, and so that's not really going to hurt the deck. Therefore, Muck isn't really all that useful unless you're playing against decks like Rain Dance. Like I said, this really turned out to be an anti-Rain Dance deck because you could deal electric type damage fairly quickly, knock out those Squirtles or Magikarps, and then Muck would make sure that Rain Dance never goes into effect and you don't get overwhelmed by water energy. So the Scientist theme deck actually turned out to be one of the worst decks that I built just running off of these trainer class themes. But, you know, you can still have fun with it. You got your draw power and a playset of Bill, couple copies of Oak, couple copies of Computer Search as well, because there are 3 different evolution lines in this deck. You get kind of caught up every now and then, and Computer Search can really help find the evolution that you need when you need it. I prefer just putting in a couple of computer searches over using Pokemon Trader, because what I found was I'll have, you know, maybe a Magnemite and a Voltorb already down on the field, and maybe I'll already have an Electrode in my hand, but I would also really like to get a Magneton without having to sacrifice the Electrode that's in my hand, and so Computer Search is just a faster way to get that evolution card. Unless you know you're up against a deck that's going to be laying down a Pokepower soon, your priorities are always going to be the magnets and the balls. 3 switch to get around some less favorable retreat costs, or if you get a Magneton pulled into the active position before it's ready to explode itself, that way you can get it back on the bench and just pull out your opponent's vulnerable Pokemon when it is time to explode with Gust of Wind, because if you're going to be knocking yourself out with Self-Destruct, you want to make sure it's worth it. You want to make sure you're getting a knockout on your opponent too. To help with that, you do have a full playset of Plus Power and a full playset of Defender, because Magneton's Self-Destruct specifies that you deal 100 damage to yourself. And so if you have 2 defenders on a Magneton when you use Self-Destruct, you can actually save yourself, and it may be you don't get knocked out next turn. You might actually save yourself for another turn, which will give you time to get that Magneton onto the bench. I did have people in that deck building video saying that you can't lay more than 1 defender per turn on a Pokemon, but I couldn't find any ruling saying that defender wasn't stackable. Because you will be self-destructing a lot in order to get knockouts, you're going to need that energy retrieval trainer card in order to get those energy out of the discard and back into your hand. But there are 15 lightning energy in this deck, so you won't really have to worry about getting energy screwed initially. Okay, so there is another Magneton that you can use, but it also requires a lot of energy to attack, and it has less HP. The only sticking point here is that even though Self-Destruct deals less damage than the fossil one on this base set Magneton, is that 2 of the energy required for it are colorless. So keep that in mind as we also talk about base set Electrode. This Electrode can deal some decent damage for 3 energy with Electric Shock, but no one used it for that. Every time you see this in a deck, it's because of Buzz Zap, which allows you to knock out Electrode, your opponent takes a prize, and then Electrode becomes a double rainbow energy that you can attach to a Pokemon. Magneton's Self-Destruct attack was already just a suicide attack, but imagine if you were going to knock out an Electrode so you can attach it to a Magneton so it can knock itself out. You'd be giving your opponent 2 prize cards just so you can maybe take 1. It's real dumb, so you can see how I was kind of painted into a corner here, building a deck around Magneton and Electrode. The only reason that makes any real sense to include either of these base set versions of those cards is so that you would be able to attack with Muck. Fossil Magneton Self-Destruct requires 4 lightning energy. Muck's Sludge attack requires 3 grass energy. So you really have to choose which type of deck it's going to be. Muck is usually not an attacker. It's there just for toxic gas. And so that's why the deck I presented was fully electric. If you did want to use grass energy in the deck so that Muck could attack with Sludge, you would have to use the base set Magneton that doesn't fully rely on lightning energy. Or alternatively, the base set Electrode, that way it could function as a double rainbow energy and provide those grass energy for Muck. The Scientist Trainer class also uses Weezing, so if you wanted to attack with Muck, it's probably just better to lean way more towards grass because Weezing also self-destructs. Scientists love explodey Pokemon, but I'd already featured this Weezing card in the Jesse and James theme deck I did, so I didn't want to have to repeat myself with the Scientist. I wanted the focus to go to magnets and balls. If you wanted to expand the idea of the Scientist a little bit, there is a Scientist in gold and silver that uses a Porygon, and I kind of debated using base set Porygon in this deck just for conversion. That way you could change your enemy's weakness to be lightning. But with only 30 HP and a fighting weakness, that is just a bad idea. As always, let me know what you thought about the deck. Are there any better ways of running a Scientist build that you can think of? Let me know what you want to see in future videos. Links to all my social media will be down in the video description. Until next video, bye!